All right, Jason, I think we're live. Thanks for being here, man. How you feeling?
Hey, nice to see you.
Yeah. So just for the listeners' your sake, then I already have kind of an idea, and I'm sure you've already been asked this questions millions of times. I mean, what's you've been I think you written 4 books so far, and you just got the Wisdom
Yeah,
just came out.
I
Or,
feel like the last book that I did was really so-called writing. The ones
okay.
before that were sort of versions of editing. In that they started out in 2005 and 2006, being very based on quotations and essays. So in that sense, I really am more of an editor than anything. I mean, I added a lot of structure, because I am interested in quotations that are about values or virtues, things like personal growth, happiness, meaning, things like this. So it's not like I didn't, do anything creative or useful.
Mm.
But my latest book, for example, is really, it has even some memoir aspects in addition to trying to bring psychological research to the table and philosophical you know hallmarks of philosophical thought from throughout the centuries.
Sure.
So this latest one was really kind of truly written and then rewritten and then proofed. And just the other day, I found 5 mistakes, which so I submitted a whole new version to Amazon.com. So it's been like you know a serious ordeal almost in regard to writing.
Gotcha. So yeah, your latest book's called Wisdom, correct? I mean,
Yes,
what was the
yes.
motivation behind it? I mean, I know you have a background in philosophy and psychology and all that. I mean, is that kind of where it was coming from? Just putting your thoughts together on things, or what was the motivation?
I think I'm so fascinated by the subject. Some of it was just wanting to kind of sit down and really go through it all and really learn it.
Okay.
Kind of like you've heard, if you know how to teach a subject, then you really have to learn it, completely.
Hmm.
And so I think by trying to write a book about wisdom and all the associated aspects of it, critical thinking and compassion and patience, things like this. I came to know those subjects and sub subjects, if you will, much better. So there was that personal interest element. In other words, I couldn't have written about baseball in that way because I just don't love
Sure.
baseball. But I think I fully connect with the idea that philosophy comes from the Greek for love of wisdom,
Hmm.
and so I really do happen to love wisdom. As weird as that may sound, since most people don't even think about the subject, let alone love it, but I've just always been fascinated by it, and Socrates and
Yeah.
all this type of stuff. And then there's some elements where I feel like um, American society is so problematic nowadays, and I feel like wisdom is just the obvious solution for so much that ails us.
Hmm.
And so I'm not saying it's like you know, uh, there's a quote out there by Abraham Maslow. He says something like, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. You see what I'm saying? So I don't think wisdom is like that generic and um, easily. It's like it's a octagonal peg, if you will, and so that's only going to fit into an octagonal hole. To use the whole round peg square hole metaphor. But I do think that we have a bunch of problems within us and between us that are octagonal in nature. That I think wisdom is just the perfect thing to solve those, to understand those problems better, and to solve them in many cases.
Yeah, I'm wondering that it seems like like these type of books like yours, like Wisdom and the Stoics stuff,
Yeah.
it started to become more popular. And I don't know if that was because of COVID, more people starting to read more or just try to find out, like you said, like American society's having some issues, and maybe these books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and
Yep. Yep.
I just finished reading. I think it's called Obstacle in the Way by I think it's Ryan Holiday or Halliday.
Yeah. He's extremely popular now. I mean,
Yeah,
really popular.
yeah. So it seems like more people are starting to like this is I don't want to say mainstream, but more people are going to these to find other different ways about alternate ways of thinking, I guess, and like looking at certain different things like morals and values and judgment and secrets and yeah.
I mean, it's not. Of course, I'm sort of surprised whenever I think of another person being interested in philosophy or personal growth or psychology, because I feel like, like I'm a huge fan of the rock group Rush, and so Rush fans just sort of, they have this instant camaraderie. Like, wow, you like Rush? Awesome. Let's talk about Rush for the next, hour. I'm gonna cancel my appointment. Let's just chill and talk. And so so it is a little surprising when I find somebody who's interested in these subjects. Obviously, not talking about higher education, like, master's level psychology. Obviously, those people are interested in psychology in a serious way. But just in general, the person who's going to buy a Ryan Holiday book, probably not a academic type of person. They're probably looking for some sort of help or personal growth from that book.
For sure.
And so there's a little bit of a surprising element to that. But by the same token, it shouldn't be that surprising, because philosophy is meant at its best, I think, to be helpful. Wisdom is a very helpful thing. And so, Socrates, for example, back in, I guess it was about, 400 BC, something like that, 410, 420. He was, going around the marketplace of Athens, engaging in conversations and, trying to get at what is virtue? What does it mean to have virtue? What type of government is best? What does wisdom mean? What is truth? What's goodness? What's happiness? All these very challenging questions. And, so we need philosophy to help us answer those types of questions. And so it's always interested people to some degree. And
Sure.
now America has, we're really suffering in certain ways. As you say, the pandemic really kind of laid bare some of our problems. And yeah, I wouldn't even shy away from using the metaphor of rot to describe what's happening in this country. And so I think that philosophy can be like the sanitizing sun, the light of day that can, basically, that's the best thing to handle rot, right? Is to subject it to the sun.
Mm.
So that's what I think philosophy is at its best.
So you think that, using that metaphor, that society or culture is kind of rotting from the inside?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've always had problems, right? Like,
Sure.
we started out slave owning, so there's a huge problem right there from the get go. Um, and we've always dealt with big problems, the Red Scare, McCarthyism, that type of thing. That was, Vietnam, the Civil Rights Movement, Nixon being shown to be a total crook and quitting,
Mm.
the Iran hostage problem crisis, the Iran Contra crisis in the 80s. So America is constantly beset by issues and problems or whatever. And so I'm not sure if we're getting healthier. I would say it's probably pretty obvious we're not getting happier, and whether we're being more successful and, kind of going, or let's say achieving our highest potential. I'd say there's a lot of evidence against that. So yeah, I mean, obviously some things are not rotten. If you want to watch Game of Thrones, call it up. There it is. It's not rotten. It's beautiful. It's right there, full color, amazing sound. But if you try to have a conversation with somebody who's on the opposite end of the political spectrum or the religious spectrum or what have you,
Sure.
it can get pretty dicey pretty fast.
I
And
agree.
that's a sign of societal problems when people shoot each other because they're that angry or that they have that much internal, I guess you might call it, kind of a mental health problem, an anger problem, being left out of society issue. Whatever causes somebody to take up mass shooting as a way to deal with whatever is bothering them.
Yeah.
That's an example of not being able to successfully talk with other people about what you think, what they think. That's kind of a symbol that you've just completely given up on society. So, I mean, that's even worse than suicide, right? If you commit suicide, you're saying, I'm going to give up on everything. Nothing is worth it. I'm
Sure.
suffering that badly. If you decide you would do well to kill 10 or 20 people before you kill yourself, now that is a incredible level of what would you call it, maladjustment, or kind of, it's sort of like a mental emotional catastrophe going on with that individual.
Yeah, no, I agree that we're in a weird state in this country, and that just kind of echoing or touching on what you were saying, that at one point that it didn't matter, what the topic was, what the debate was, subject, whatever you want to say, that instantly if you express your opinion, your feelings on the subject, you're automatically labeled as something. So for example, that at one point, I can't remember, this is probably, I think it was last year, maybe 6 months ago, but there's an article, I think that CNBC came out, or MSNBC, whoever it was basically saying if you are a very active fitness type lifestyle person, you were very conservative. And I was like, I don't know if I would agree with that article. And that was a very biased article. Then all of a sudden, but I was like, that makes sense. It's just like saying, maybe if I go take my dogs for a walk, then what does that mean? Does that label me as a certain part of the political party? But I mean, what I'm getting at though is that it seems like, we cannot have these conversations anymore and just sitting down and having our thoughts without upsetting somebody at some point. And one thing is that Jordan Peterson touched on this, is that, in order to be able to think, you have to be somewhat offensive at the same time, just because you're trying to think out loud, you're trying to express your feelings. And, like if you're trying to talk about whatever subject that is to the person, you're trying to dig at them, but you don't mean to be offensive, but it comes off as offensive. Does that kind of make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, people do protect themselves. So people are guarded. The human mind is fascinating the way it works, right? So you tend to see the differences in people really quite easily. You tend to, I mean, one of the worst things people experience is the feeling of being inconsistent. Most people don't really think about that, but it's a fear of people that in a conversation, or let's say an argument or debate, they're going to be shown to be inconsistent. That's sort of like you kind of hear the wah 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 wah. Like, okay, you lose that conversation. You were just shown to be inconsistent. And so we have all these fears and biases and everything, and it can be very challenging at times to interact with other people out there in what the Greeks used to call the polis, the city state, the people besides yourself. And yet America clearly has benefited in the past from cooperating. Everything from fighting a war against the Nazis to going to the moon and back to dealing with the crisis that occurred in 2008 or whatever. So in individualists, people who think they've got it all figured out, they're right about everything, they don't need other people, they're better than other people. Those are not really the best types of individuals, I think, and certainly America. There's a definitely like a rugged individualism type of a streak that has done a lot of things for us and put us in good stead as far as inventing new things, or having world-class education, or making somebody wealthy. But I feel like philosophy has so much that can be useful in helping us understand ourselves. Socrates actually said, know thyself is like the main thing, and to live an unexamined life is something that is really a terrible mistake, a big waste. And there's also a lot that philosophy can do to help us understand our very, very complex world, our very complex minds, brains, and so on and so forth. So it's a very rich subject, and can pay so many dividends for anybody who's willing to pick up a Ryan Holiday book or any other. There's probably 500 books on philosophy, where that personal growth type of philosophy that can be just so useful and interesting.
Do you think that, and kind of again touching on what you just said, that people will find a side and they stay on that side just because, I don't know, again using that one example, that okay, so all conservatives are fitness enthusiasts, or whatever you want to say, and that they find information supporting their facts and ideologies and methodologies, and they go and shout it about on Twitter. Then all of a sudden, people who don't really do their homework and research things on themselves, they lock themselves in echo chambers with these people, and then they go back and forth supporting each other's ideas without looking at opposing views or what somebody else might think about. Well, that's not entirely true, but can we break it down a little bit? But that's where we get stuck in this downfall, is that we're shouting from the mountaintops, our point of view, without actually just sitting and listening to what other people are saying. And real quick, somebody made it out to a point, like, to me, that when most people, when they're having conversations nowadays, that they're not really listening to what the other person is saying. They're just thinking about the next thing they're going to say next. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
It is true. And I've often heard, I've heard a person was, it's a quote, basically. I'm paraphrasing. Somebody said, most people, when they think they're thinking, they're just rearranging their prejudices.
Okay.
I think that was Newt Rockney, the football legend. I could be wrong, but it wasn't Einstein. It was somebody surprisingly, in that vein. But I mean, there's so much I could say to this. First, basically, yes to the things you were saying to your question.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias is really interesting thing. Very, very important nowadays. It's one of these biases that humans have,
Sure.
which is fascinating in the first place. But people do love to, kind of emotionally determine what they want to believe or discover in a particular situation or task, and then they go about trying to prove that is indeed correct, and then they get a bit of dopamine and surging through their brain. They think, well, I figured that one out. Okay, close the browser. Next, and of course, if folks are into Twitter and so on and so forth, they love to argue about what they believe is right. Mm-hmm. But I think philosophy is here to say, don't be so quick to be so sure that you are correct about something. And there are, dozens or hundreds of quotes that are along the lines of, if you think you have everything figured out, you're wrong about that, because clearly you don't. If you need to be more modest in that sense and say, I'm still learning things. I have things I can learn from other people. I mean, goodness gracious, if you spend 5 hours talking with somebody who lives in a rest home, retirement community is not the right description, because basically somebody who doesn't have the same life they used to. It's so interesting. Like I did this once when I was taking my therapy dog around to these types of places, came across a former professional baseball player.
Nice.
Like from the 50s. It was just so interesting, I went home and found out he was not lying. And you can kind of see the size of his hands, you know what I mean? Like, you can see he lost a lot of his strength over the years, but his hands showed that I bet he really could grip that bat and, hit an 80-mile-an-hour, pitch and run around the bases lickety split. And here he is sitting there watching, probably watching Jerry Springer or something all day. You know what I mean? It's like, if you talk to that person, there's so much that you can learn if you just have an open mind about, what they can teach. And, let's face it, America is better at looking forward and inventing and innovating than we are when it comes to wisdom. Essentially, basically, the idea of there are lessons and truths and important points that are out there, and oftentimes this quintessential wise old person has these things in their head, and if you never talk to them, you never it's really kind of a sad thing. It's not as bad as dementia, which is like a fate worse than death. But just as far as, two people go, if you never have that conversation, you really miss out on much that they can teach. That's not to say that, a 90-year-old person is the wisest person there is. That's kind of like a caricature in that, Chinese, Confucian, Indian way of thinking about, Indian in both senses, way of thinking about things. In America, at least, the old person could be, a real son of a bitch. You talk to him, you're like, dude, yeah, conversation over. You're an ignorant fool, and I want to get out of this conversation as fast as possible. And in other cases, you talk to somebody who's, 18 or 15 or 25, and they can really impress you with how sharp they are and all the things that they know and all the things they realize. So you kind of have to judge each person individually. But in general, the older you are, the longer you've been alive, the greater chance you have of being able to assemble all of these separate pieces into a coherent whole, which is a kind of a type of wisdom activity.
Yeah, and it goes a long way, especially that if you are self-conscious and self-aware of going along your own path, that and you don't mind, sitting down and thinking about a few things, whether you do something right, you do something wrong. You can think about, like, one thing for me is, like, I've started to try to journal more, and like I've been reading a lot more, and just
Yeah.
instead of just going off based off what Joe Smo said on the street about X thing. It's just like, well, let me sit down and think about this and how I really feel, and it's almost so easy to go along, especially with with podcasts and all the books that are out there and all the information that's out there, that you can get sucked into something that it's like so much information that you don't even know how to break it down to your own thing. But it's just one of those things that I've learned, that not only thinking but writing things out. So if we're talking about baseball, for example, or Roe v. Wade, or tough things, what just happened, the loan forgiveness things. Well, let me just think a minute, like, how do I really feel, rather than just saying, like, going through Facebook, Instagram, like, well, X person said that this is not right, or this is good, or this is whatever. And it's like, well, I don't want to, be like a sheep and just follow along with that. But, and I think, listening to people who enjoy philosophy, like, Ryan Holiday, and reading meditations. I read that during COVID, that it's, it doesn't always have to be, the first thing that comes to your mind. Let me say that out loud for everyone to hear.
Right.
Yeah. Just let me sit down for a second and let me first think about it, and those conversations can be fun. I'm not saying they're not. Just let me, like, 3, 2, 1, go. How do you feel about, abortion or whatever it is, religion, politics? But, I feel like I feel better, thinking about it and writing my thoughts out. Like I said, it's one of those things that, what is that saying, competence builds confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's true. There was a mathematician from the 16th century, Blaise Pascal, and he said something like, all of our problems result from the fact that we can't sit quietly in a room by ourselves.
Wow.
It is a challenge to turn your phone off, so there's no chance of it pinging or ringing, and then to sit there and just, like, watch the sunset, or look at the trees, or I don't know, even just close your eyes. But I think the evidence really shows that meditation is extremely beneficial. Mm-hmm. And okay, so meditation is kind of like not thinking in a sense, but I think there's really something to be said for thinking. In other words, act as a meditator would: sit there in a quiet room, turn your phone off, don't be hungry, thirsty, or have to pee or anything like this, and then just start thinking about something that interests you or that bothers you or whatever. That's a bit of a challenge, but of course extremely useful. So again, not really meditating, but kind of in that same general category. That's stuff that you can do, within your own mind. Then you mentioned, reading. I mean, gosh, there's so much that you can read. That's, you might like Seneca next. I'm sure Ryan Holiday mentions Seneca in his books. He's a Roman philosopher, really interesting guy, and his book called Letters from a Stoic, so interesting. He's conversing with another person, a younger person, and he just shares so much that's so interesting, and really rich life he lived. I mean, he was forced by Nero, I think it was, the Roman emperor, to kill himself, and he did. I mean, just like, wow, his life was gargantuan in size compared to the life that some of us lead. And so if that guy wrote a book about stoicism and philosophy, it's interesting, right? It'd be a shame to miss that. And so that's the kind of thing that I think, reading can do. I'm a huge fan of reading. Things like Moby Dick can be a little scary, or they seem kind of boring or whatever, but sure, Moby Dick is stuck around for all this time because it's got these important lessons, these interesting things. So now in the time of YouTube, if you're interested in Moby Dick, look up a video on it. I don't mean a 3-minute video. I mean a
A deep
20 to
dive,
60
yeah.
minute encapsulation of what was Melville trying to say and what are the lessons of it. And, some amazing things are out there on YouTube. You just have to be very judicious about what you spend your time on, because it can also be, a huge time suck and very distracting if you get involved in the wrong video. So, and one last thing on this topic is, it also can be great to have dialogue with other people. I know that when I got married, my ability to converse probably increased, fivefold or something. I'm a little bit of an introvert, and so I would, having a wife who's always there. I mean, I'm just kidding, but it's like you can always start a conversation because there they are. If they're not looking at their phone or reading or whatever, then they probably want to talk to you, and you can talk through some very interesting things. I know my wife and I, we both kind of shout at the news when we're watching it. We're like, son of a bitch, like what? And then we'll just start talking about that. And sometimes we see things eye to eye. Sometimes we have differences. Like I'm an agnostic, kind of spiritual,
Sure.
not that far from atheistic, and she's devoted Catholic, not Catholic in the sense of like thinks that the Pope is, the greatest thing ever, but she loves Jesus Christ basically. And I don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be a bit of a division if we're talking about something like abortion, So
Sure.
she'll say to me, by the way, there's no chance I'm ever going to have an abortion, right? So let's just be clear about that. You're almost 50 and I'm 40, but if we get pregnant, we're going to have that child. That's where I stand on that. Are you clear about that?
Yeah.
So those are very, they can be very interesting, challenging, fruitful conversations.
But it seems to work out, because there's a lot of people who say that, you have to have the same ideologies, the same interests, the same everything in order for it to work. But, I've always thought that it doesn't have to be that way, that you can have opposing, ideas about things or whatever you want to say. And it still can work. I mean, just like you're saying with your wife, you being, did you say you're agnostic or atheist?
Yeah, more like agnostic.
Yeah. And then your wife being, Catholic, did you say she was Catholic or Christian?
She is, but she's more like kind of non-denominational Christian.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool, like, because you can sit down and have those conversations, and like that's kind of what we were touching on earlier. And at the end of the day, you're still married and you're not wanting to wring each other's neck, and throw each other out the window. And it's cool to bounce your ideas off one another, because, I found that again, you need that constructive criticism, and, there's that one book, How to Influence Friends and Win Others. I probably butchered that title, but, you try to see the point of view in another person's eyes or shoes or whatever you want to say. And it's just like, hey, I didn't really see it like that. And that makes perfect sense. And and I like things like that, you just like, hey, and at the end of the day, you can still be friends. I mean, you can still, break bread over the dinner table and have these conversations. And it's cool. And like a lot of people, for some reason, I guess they think that it doesn't work, but it does work. It's just as long as you don't mind having tough conversations and not get going from zero to ballistic and just over one touchy subject. Just sit down like adults and debate the thing, and at the end of the day, high five each other, whatever it is, and get out of there. It's
yeah.
We're missing
That's easiest when you have a friendship, and Aristotle talked about friendship in a very admiring way, and it's been an important thing ever since. So if you're friends with somebody, it's much easier to go there and to challenge each other and be like, no, I still think of you as a friend. I still love you. I'm not saying it, but I'm saying you're just the way you think about gun rights versus gun restrictions is crazy to me, and then you have that conversation, and people can change if the conversation is done well. I'm taking a whole class this semester called moral deliberation, which is essentially like talking about moral topics, issues that are of great importance with other people in that kind of political sense. And that's going to be interesting for me because, I have trouble with that like other people do. We're all kind of, we all kind of tend to be a little tribalistic, unless you're like apolitical. If you're apolitical, then you don't think of yourself as particularly tribalistic, but, 60-70% of us, do. And, when it comes to religion, maybe like diehard Yankees fan, I don't know, whatever, like there's always things that people really, really, really feel strongly about. So to talk with somebody who is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from that, usually we just kind of try to avoid it. Maybe you come across people, if you serve on a jury, you just have to deal with those people.
Yeah.
But it can be a real, it can be a fortunate occurrence to, let's say, be stuck in an elevator with three people for an hour and a half. The movie The Breakfast Club, right? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It's like that's where some interesting things can really happen. You kind of break out of your rut, and you challenge and you reconsider. And one of the there's a quote by Churchill that says, and I think he was quoting somebody named Benjamin Disraeli. He said, if you can't change your mind, you can't change anything. I mean, think about that. Your mind doesn't even have, it's basically like weightless, timeless, and spaceless, right? It's like, what is the mind? If you can't change that, it's hard to change a lock from locked to unlocked. That's harder than it is to change your mind, in a sense, right? Because that requires calories and effort and dexterity. Changing your mind, you can do it in a snap if you wanted to. It's just that we usually don't want to.
Yeah. That's a problem. That I guess, for so long, if you don't have that open mindset, if you stay stuck in that fixed mindset, that whatever you think, whatever your environment was growing up, whether it was nature, and then nature versus nurture comes along, that you don't want to hear any other opposing ideas about said thing. But it almost comes down to case by case scenarios. So talk about gun rights. When COVID happened, or if we're still in COVID or whatever it is, that gun sales went right through the roof. And it's like, well, some people wanted to get some guns in, even though they hated guns. And I'm not sitting here advocating for guns or anything, but when times get tough, it seems like, okay, well, it shouldn't come to that though. Let me change my way of thinking just because the apocalypse is coming or whatever. That we need guns now. We need everyone we can get. But and I agree that guns can and can't be good or bad. I mean, we're not here to talk about gun control or gun violence, but just like what you said, though, I mean, if you go along just thinking, I'm anti-gun, and all of a sudden doomsday's coming, it's like, we need guns. It's just like, well, you must like guns for a little bit. Why were you saying they were not? Why are you saying now on the other side of the fence? Doesn't make sense, and I guess, maybe that's fight or flight mode. I guess that's a bunch of different ways that can be argued, but but it's one of those weird things.
Guns really are interesting. I mean, if you think about it, it may save your life.
Sure.
If you think about it, it's a vicious weapon that a lot of people use to shoot their own head with every year, or shoot somebody else, kill them, and then, have to face those consequences. Usually there are always consequences for killing somebody in anger or out of vengeance or whatever. So it's a fascinating topic. I'm the son of a sheriff deputy, a reserve officer. My father, he had a career, but he also served in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department all the way up to captain. Wow. And so there's that. And so whenever I was being asked to be considered for a jury, they'd be like, do you know any law enforcement officers? I'm like, yeah, my father. Sometimes we go shooting. I know he's got a badge and, serves every 2 weeks, blah, blah, blah. So they're like, okay, they put a check mark on their paper, and they're like, do you ever think the police ever do anything wrong? And I'm like, hell yeah, I do. And they're like, you can see their head kind of explode, like, oh shit. I thought he was going to be, this type of guy. Maybe he's that type of guy. I don't know. Maybe he's both. And so I always seem to get rejected from juries for that reason, because it's like, do I think that police officers make mistakes? Yes, they do. Do I think that they have framed suspects in the past and those people have gone to their death? Yes, I do. Do I think that I want to live in a society without cops? No, I don't. Do I think that a police officer is a respectable profession? Yes, with the little footnote that says, but you have to be a good cop, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very nuanced, and usually if you trot out an ideology like guns are, the worst thing in society, we have to get rid of them immediately. Or on the other end of the spectrum, I will die before I let somebody take a gun out of my hand. Those are just so extreme that there's really no nuance there. And wisdom is almost always nuanced. I mean, give me a topic and I'll tell you how it is nuanced. Abortion, it's like, is it killing a human being on the one end, or is it like allowing a woman her liberties on the
Sure.
other? Or is it a huge mix of all these different? I mean, does life begin at conception? Does life begin when you start to see a heartbeat? Does life begin
Yeah.
when it can live outside the womb? It's like, this is complicated stuff. And
Hmm.
so if you just have like like a thing you go to real quick and you're like, this is how I feel about this topic, and boom, 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 that's what I've decided. I decided a long time ago and I'm not changing. That's too inflexible, I think, for most of these very complex issues that face us.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I think that's where we start to get in trouble. That people do go along with that. They heard something from somewhere, from their role model or their parents or a teacher or
Yeah.
professor, and they go along with those ideologies and just never think otherwise to you know check on it, see what the facts are for themselves. I mean, it's the same way with I'm one of those fitness guys, and that each year there's always some kind of new fad diet or
Yeah.
whatever, something new that's a breakthrough that's going to help people live to be 170 or whatever it is, and that then it comes out that well, this diet worked for person A, but it didn't work for person B. But in the person B's, well, I did everything person A was doing. I don't get it. And it's just like, well, do your own research. Just because it
Yeah.
worked for person A, there's no, one universal diet that fits everybody. I mean, their bodies are completely different across the board. And, it's one of those things that, again, I mean, bringing it back to those things that, they don't do their homework and then they just go from the rooftops. And then for the rest of their life, they're just, oh, well, carnivore diet sucks. Don't ever do it. It's like, well, that doesn't mean it's like that, and I guess that could kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier. Is it's like, well, sit down and actually think about things that are going on rather than just, taking about what, person A said rather than your mom or whatever it is. And that's where I think I was talking with somebody at the gym the other night that we were wondering if people were starting to be told, or people just want to be told how to live their lives and are told what to think and not how to think, rather than, hey, growing up, challenge everything, question everything. It doesn't always have to be that way, and I think that's maybe like going back to the problems in society or the world or whatever. That's kind of where we're sitting at. Just people just want to go along with their easy life and just not be told, bad things, good things, and just like, hey, do this and you'll be able to get to point B to point C. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It's true. This is like personal growth, basically. You think the world is something. As you go through it, you find out it's not quite what you thought, and
Mhm.
here's how it's different. You think that science is the be all end all. It's just fantastic, and then you find out that some scientific articles are fudged. Or
Yeah,
you find out that
that's coming out a
um,
lot
you know
lately.
cigarette companies used to fund research or whatever. All these nuances, and so it's actually kind of it's okay. It's better to have a view like, I am a philosopher. I go through life trying to find out information,
Mhm.
trying to grow, improve, change, think things through, have discussions, be modest enough, humble enough to say, "Yeah, I'm going to change my mind on that. You helped
Sure.
me change my mind. You were right about that." Or it seems like the evidence is really on your side. That's awesome. I'm going to really think about your perspective and maybe I'll adopt it. That type of attitude, it's so much easier really than to already try to get these things crystallized and foreclosed at one point and then never have to think about it again. You know what I mean? That's just,
Yeah.
you can't. I mean, yeah. If you When you watch a child grow from age 1 to 20, the changes that occur are fascinating and interesting and deep and shocking and whatever. And if you're a parent, you see this happening before your eyes. And so to think that you are so different because you have everything all set and all figured out because you're that smart, it's kind of like, well, everybody else in the world has to grow, but you've already grown, you've figured it out. I mean, Socrates, for example, was called the wisest man in the world back in I don't know, 450 or whatever, negative 450. Why? Because he wasn't really very sure about all this stuff, and so he
Yeah,
began to investigate it, and that's why he was thought of as wise. I mean, I think it's kind of arguable, but
sure.
he wasn't wise because he read all these things on parchment or whatever. He knew more facts about Egypt or about the stars. I don't know, whatever Greeks would think about. He was investigating things like virtue, and he would be like, because if I were to ask you what virtue is, you would be stumped. If you ask me what virtue is, I might know a couple more things because I've thought about it, but
Sure.
I'm probably going to have a hard time understanding.
Uh-oh. Did you freeze up on me?
What point should you consider taking your own life? What point should you take the life of another?
Mm,
Should you have children? Should you abstain from having children? What type of government is best? All these things very challenging, and it can be thought of as optimistically, like I'm interested in all this stuff. I want to read stuff. I want to talk to people. I don't want to get sucked into a media, social media type of vacuum or whatever, where it's
sure.
like you just get used by these companies for your eyeballs, basically, right? To keep your eyeballs on their product. You want to have a much wider perspective and love philosophy. Think of it like I love wisdom because wisdom is that's where those true answers can lie, and you don't get it just because your your parents said that they have got it, and when they tell it to you, you're like, oh, okay, now I've got it. That's
Yeah.
not how wisdom works.
Was there one single moment, like childhood or something that you came across philosophy and or just read something and just like wow, I want to get more into this. Was it just reading a Aristotle or Socrates
Yeah,
quote and you just said
I
man,
had a
good shit.
I had a bit of a difficult childhood, and so I felt like I didn't have um, it's hard to describe, but it's like my parents didn't parent me in a way that a parent should be parenting a child
Mm,
or adolescent, and so I felt like I was kind of alone out there in the world, and I've always been a little different, perhaps, or insecure, maybe, and so then I really started feeling alone in my late adolescence, and so when I came across a philosophy class in college and psychology classes as well, I became very excited by that because I thought, my religion didn't really stick or fill that hole. And
hmm
my family is broken up and addicted to substances and this and that and the other. I'm out on my own trying to figure all this world out. And philosophy was very inspiring because that's where I think answers can really be relied upon. Things like science and philosophy, much it's much like firmer ground um, than theology is, I think. And those three things try to answer those big questions: philosophy, theology, and psychology. And I think psychology and philosophy are the more reliable of the three. And I was just deeply fascinated by those subjects. They helped me. They, like you've read Meditations, right?
yeah,
It helped Marcus Aurelius to have philosophy. He was talking to himself basically in that book. Remember this. Don't forget that. Here's a principle you've known for a long time. Stay, keep your eye on the prize.
yeah,
Realize that this is how the world works. Don't forget your values. Don't forget who you are. These types of things. That's extremely powerful stuff. It was powerful for Marcus Aurelius, probably the best emperor and maybe the only philosopher king we've had in history.
hmm
And it can be helpful for you and me and anybody who can hear my voice and anybody who can't hear my voice because that's just how philosophy works.
yeah. They can usually, like you said earlier, find something meaningful into it if they don't mind just sitting down and taking time to do it. And whether they're just stumbling upon it or read it for the first time just because it was recommended by a friend. I've read articles and heard people on other podcasts who they read meditations at least once a year, if not more.
Yeah.
They carry it around everywhere they go, and it's just one of those things. You highlight stuff in it and look up stuff and go back to it, and it's like, wait, if you've got a problem in life, let me see what Marcus was thinking on this, and
Yeah.
and it's
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
I love quotations, and you know, I don't necessarily like quotations like from a particular individual or from a particular time period or society. I like quotations that are good, that talk about values, talk about virtues,
Yeah.
personal growth, um, those things that are just the most important things. And if you love quotations about that type of stuff, there are, many, many, many of them that will just, blow your mind. They're so interesting. And that was one of the approaches I took in my latest book, is to really bring a lot of quotations I think are the best about wisdom, but also about these these aspects of wisdom, things like critical thinking
Yeah.
and empathy and compassion and delaying gratification and skepticism.
Hmm.
Quotes about these things can really be extremely beneficial. They're like bite-sized chunks of good stuff. You can get a hold of a bad one and be misled, but there's a lot of quotations on those types of subjects that are just very enlightening. Most people, most people, if they have an issue when it comes to quotations, it's not that they have gotten a hold of some bad ones and are being misled. It's that they haven't really gotten a hold of enough good ones yet, and they aren't inspired enough yet.
So when you say getting misled, like a bad quotations, is that just something you mean by it got misinterpreted, or somebody, read it and it was supposed to go, or took it out of context? I guess is probably what I'm saying, and that's why it's considered a bad quotation. Is that
Well,
exactly what you mean, or
it's interesting that quotations can conflict with each other, right?
okay?
So they're like little pearls of wisdom, but it's not quite plug and play, because if you can find a pearl of wisdom that conflicts with another pearl of wisdom, now what do you do? Right? So you still need to figure out which one is better, which one you believe. It helps you with your values and your virtues
I
if
see.
you tease apart all of these things and you're like, now I'm really convinced that I believe in strength, let's say, or love or creativity, because I've been thinking about it for so long. I've been looking at quotations and doing it, and doing it like creative work, or I've remembered it, right? That was one of the aspects of meditations, right? He was like, remember these things that that you should know, this wisdom, remember it as times become tough. So that's strength in part. And so you have to just spend a lot of time delving into what strength means, why you like it, how you can use it, how you can not forget about it. So it's like it's always going to be there for you.
Hmm.
It's like a friend or whatever. It's always there for you, but you have to meet it halfway and do that work in order to have the quotations or the virtues. These things, they sing in a sense. If you
Okay.
really experience a virtue or a value, something that just, I mean, like I don't know, fighting for your country
Sure.
in World War II. You know what I mean? Like that's the the center of the universe when it comes to certain values, right? Like loyalty, camaraderie,
Mm.
courage, mercy, all these different things. And the further we get away from important um, uses of these values and virtues, the weaker and more watered down they get. But if you are, competing in the Olympics, it's right in front of your mind. I have to win. I need to be strong. I need to be focused. I believe I can do this. All these different types of things those are those values just right there in front of you. So I would absolutely say get excited about what values you get excited, whatever ones seem natural to you and that you love,
Mm.
go toward them for the rest of your life.
Is there a false narrative that when talking about philosophy and psychology and everything, that and people think they have to have a certain IQ or be considered smart to even understand it, or even to even pick it up and just even start reading a book like Meditations or whatever? And I get, I mean, I guess kind of what I'm getting at is, some people will just push it off and just say, that's only for free thinkers or people who teach in higher education, but I won't know anything about it. And for example, didn't Socrates even quote? When is he quoted like the only thing I know that is that I know nothing or something like that at one point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, is that just a false narrative? Like you can just pick it up and start to read it however you want to, and then you can kind of go back and think about how you think they were supposed to be interpreted. Or like you said, you can go down and YouTube and watch a 20-minute video and take a dive down to see what experts in the field are actually thinking, as long as you don't mind doing a little work.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think the minimum IQ you need to philosophize is like 90,
Okay.
100. I think if people are suffering from lack of philosophy in their lives, it's probably not that they're not smart enough. It's probably that they don't care enough
Good point.
to spend the time. I mean, I worked pretty hard in college and graduate school, and I'm still taking classes. And so it's like maybe I am smart, maybe I'm not,
Sure.
but I do know that I am willing to take time to dedicate myself to things that interest me.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have obviously, there's even an idea out there that the smarter you are, the harder it is for you to see wisdom, because you're so smart, you think you know everything already. You're not really willing to do that philosophical work that's required. So maybe somebody with 110 IQ is the perfect person to study philosophy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with starting with Philosophy for Dummies. I read that book. I read it twice. The author is a really interesting guy. He's on LinkedIn and Twitter. He's always interacting with people. He wrote a great book, and it's like 400 pages or whatever. So it's not that it's easy, because a 400-page book is never easy, but it's he doesn't complicate these things because he wants to impress his colleagues. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see perfectly what you're saying. And talking about, people getting into philosophy and like learning more about themselves and learning about what others think about certain subjects, about like loyalty and honesty and camaraderie, like you were saying earlier. I mean, what do you think the future of philosophy is? I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, you think more people, like we were talking about earlier, are going to keep confiding into the Stoics and going down these philosophy roads and thinking about more about, let me see what others are saying more, or is it going to become at a point where people are just going to be like, these think they're already smart enough where they already know everything, and just it gets phased out, with internet and technology today.
We Technology has ceased to be our friend. I think in this sense, because whereas we used to be optimistic about the internet and what it could do. I mean, do you remember? Did you ever like get on America Online or whatever?
Oh yeah, I was a kid when I was going on. Yeah.
So that was like a glorious time of like optimism about what technology can mean and so on. But now I think we've created these bizarre situations where companies make money when we spend more time on their sites, and therefore when we either lose time or when we argue with each other. And there's a lot of evidence out there that Facebook and Twitter are really they're sort of like pernicious corporations. Like you think of them like cigarette manufacturers. Back in the day when cigarette manufacturers were on trial for misleading the public and doing what they needed to do because it made them money. That was the most important thing. It makes us money. Everything else, they're like nasty about it. Like, do what it takes to make more money. And these internet companies or these social media companies are like that too. They say they're giving us a service, but the evidence shows that we get more depressed by participating in it, especially if you're a young female. And then things like TikTok, total waste of time, completely. I mean, okay, so I waste time by watching television. So I'm not saying that wasting time is always bad, but I'm saying TikTok or the metaverse.
Oh yeah.
Did you know they sell real estate in the metaverse?
I heard about that a while back. Yeah. I think Snoop Dogg bought some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can buy $150,000 parcel that doesn't exist. I mean, things are getting just weirder and weirder, and nothing in that realm is philosophical in any way, shape, or form. That's not to say that The Matrix is not an interesting movie about that, but it is to say that if you're sitting there, having sex with a blow-up doll in your metaverse, you're not philosophizing. and don't quote me on that, right? Don't be like, here's the takeaway.
I like that. Okay. Oh, that's funny. Well, Jason, I want to be respectful of your time and all that good stuff. So, I mean, I feel like it's end this podcast on a good laugh like that. But
Yeah.
if people want to find the book, if you want to plug anything, all that good stuff, feel free to do that. If they want to find it, whatever.
Well, I definitely am happy to plug these other books we've been discussing, right? We talked about Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. We talked about books by Ryan Holiday. You mentioned Jordan Peterson.
Mhm.
I mentioned Tom Morris and his Philosophy for Dummies. Any book is good. These books that we've been discussing are, probably very good, bordering on great at times. My books are, they are what they are. They're not exactly flying off the shelf, but I put my heart and soul into this latest book. It's about wisdom. I liken it to love in the sense that you can't buy it, but it's very, very valuable. And so that's an interesting thing, right? How do you get it if you can't buy it, and yet it's so very valuable, right? People really want love. They want to be loved. That's like one of the driving forces in a human's life, and yet you can't buy it. So you have to get it in some other way. And that's just interesting to me. So, yeah, I mean, it's on Amazon.com. My last name is, Merchey. That's a good way to find it. I do have a website. I've been putting it together since 2004, and it's free. There's no ads. Nice. You can go there and just totally get lost in all. A lot of the work that I've done about quotations, values, virtues, personal growth, philosophy, I put it on my website so that other people can be interested in it for no cost. And I'm not even kidding about that. I'd rather people take it and never talk to me, never say thank you, just take it and run, than to not take it, right? Because it's there for that purpose.
Sure.
And so there's a lot that you can do with quotations. You can find out more about your values. You can find out more about your ethics. I've written 500 or 600 blogs. I've done podcasts myself as host. And so the website is called valuesofthewise.com. Like, what are the values of wise people? And I've been super interested in that for decades now. And I think anybody who hasn't tuned me out yet on this podcast might be interested in those things too. And so knock yourself out.
Cool. Jason, this was a fun conversation. I'm glad we did this, man. That was
yeah.
I know we could definitely go down some more roads just talking.
That's true.
But this was fun. Maybe we do it again sometime if you write another book.
Yeah. No, anybody who likes meditations is all right by me. I've done 25 hours of podcasting on this book, or my stuff in general, and it's like the highlight of my day or even my week sometimes. Like that, I think that was a great conversation, and then I go and I watch some true crime drama, and it's like my life just slows down and gets boring again. So yeah, it was very cool to talk.
Yeah, no, I read that book during COVID, and I guess now that we've been talking about it, it's probably the longest I've talked about it on a podcast. I'll have to go back and reread it. But real quick though, I think Ryan was saying that, is there two different versions of it? Do you know? Like has there been, I can't remember, there was like
I'm not aware that there was. I know that he never intended it to be published, which is super interesting.
Yeah,
right?
I heard
it was a diary.
Yeah.
And one of his aides or whatever, after he was died or was murdered, depending on how you feel about the movie Gladiator, they basically took it and was like, he wrote this in his own hand. I can't just throw this away like he wanted me to, like I promised him I would. I'm going to publish it. And that was a great service to humanity, because it's one of the greatest, most interesting books on philosophy that has been published, pound for pound, at least.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, maybe I misquoted that or misheard that, but I'll go back and Google or something like that.
But hey, here's a sentence I'm not embarrassed to admit. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, man, that's okay. That's the best thing to do, is just to say, I don't know. I don't mind. But I think if for some reason, maybe it was like an early version and they reprinted it or something. Who knows? But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So again, thank you, man.
You're welcome.
This was cool. So
absolutely.
All right, folks, we're gone. Good night.